In this video, we'll be having a look at one of the types of epithelial tissue. Now remember from the previous video that there's two names that are incorporated whenever we're talking about epithelial tissue. One describes how many cell layers there are. So if it's one cell layer thick, it's simple epithelium. If it's multiple layers, it's stratified epithelium. We also incorporate the name of this shape of the cell. So it's squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. And we're going to start by looking at simple epithelial. So what does this tell us? That simple epithelial tells us it's the one layer thick type. And one of the sort of things to think about once again is that concept of form and function. So it's one cell layer thick. So this means it's probably allowing for things to move across it. So transportation of substances between tissues are a very important component. Now, let's have a look at simple squamous epithelium. And we can see the two names, right? Simple tells us it's one cell layer thick. Squamous tells us it is a flattened type cell. And we can actually see that right here. It's a single layer of very flattened cells. So, very thin single layer of cells. Often on the side look, they're described as sort of fried egg appearance, and they do allow typically for rapid diffusion of substances. Now what would this be? Things like oxygen, carbon dioxide, fluids, ions. So not surprisingly, we see these in part of the alveoli of the lungs, part of the tubules within the kidneys, lining of certain blood vessels. And let's just have a look at the tissue. Now there's two tissues here. This is underlying connective tissue, right? That's what we're looking at. But what we're interested in is the simple squamous epithelium up here. Now remember, the cells are tightly packed together because that's the feature of epithelium. There is a little basement membrane that runs underneath. Because remember, the usual case is that we have epithelium, a basement membrane that has components from the epithelium and the underlying connective tissue, and an underlying connective tissue. Now that's the artist's diagram there. Let's look at the micrograph and you can see the same thing. And this would be closer to what you would see in under your microscopes in the histology lab. There's the individual cells. Now the dark blue, that's the nucleus, right? So the cells themselves would take up spaces approximately there. There is a very thin basement membrane, very difficult to see, and underneath here is a connective tissue, and this is a lot of fibers, a lot of thick fibers running through this connective tissue, and there's one of the cells that's involved with that connective tissue, but that's for down the road. Okay, so simple squamous epithelium, one cell layer thick, really about allowing things to come and go across it. And remember, epithelium, when we name it, it's named on how many cell layers and the shape. So let's go to another type of simple. So we're looking at all the single layer types. And here it is, right here. Here is it right there. Now remember, epithelium faces in towards inside cavities, or it faces the outside world. So here's a cavity right there, okay? And these are epithelial cells. Here are the nuclei. There's the epithelial cells. Right, various epithelial cells. Now, this is called simple cuboidal. So it is one cell layer thick, and you may look in and go, well, this doesn't look exactly like a cube, but it sort of kind of does. So it's cuboidal. Right? Now, we can see, remember the same theme. Here's epithelium, and here is a thin layer of basement membrane underneath, and here is connective tissue. That's down here. They go hand in hand. They're like best friends forever in the world of histology, largely. So, simple cuboidal, a single layer of cube-shaped cells with a large central nuclei. That's what we see there. But it's thin enough to allow for diffusion. So where do we see it? We see it in some of the tubing, the plumbing of the respiratory passages. We see it in the renal tubes, ducts of many glands, thyroid gland, I should say. And here, let's just have a look at the photomicrograph. Once again, big central nucleus. You can see sort of the cell defined, kind of there, right? You can see the definition of the cell. One cell layer thick. You can see underlying basement membrane. And this is a type of connective tissue. You can see there's a lot of fibrous stuff running through here. That's one of the types of connective tissue that we'll see down the road. Okay, so that was simple cuboidal. Now, there's another one, simple columnar. Once again, one cell layer thick, but the shape of the cells falls into the columnar category. So, single layer, rectangular shaped cells. The nuclei tends to hang out closer to the basilar. By the way, this is a basilar surface, okay? And this is the apical. Apical up there, basilar surface down here where it connects to the other tissue. So, the nuclei is in the basilar portion of the cell. Where do we see this? Sometimes we see this in microvilli, associated microvilli, cilia, and a few other places in the body. But very distinctive shape right there, columnar. And yes, indeed, there is a basement membrane, and yes, indeed, this is connective tissue down there. Now, don't confuse this one with the next one, because let's check this out. Remember the one we just talked about, that simple columnar? The cells are columnar shaped. The nuclei are down closer to the basilar area. All right. Now here's the next one. This is called pseudo-stratified. Pseudo means basically fake, right? So it looks like it's stratified, but it actually isn't. Now at first when you look at it, you go, oh, well, there's a nuclei there, 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 there. Oh, these must just be layers of cells. But they're not, because, let me try and zoom in, because if you actually follow the outline of a given cell, this cell does touch the base, right? This cell touches the base. This cell touches the base. They all touch the basement membrane. So it is just one cell layer thick. Although, if you look at it quickly, you may think it's many cell layers thick. And that's why we call it pseudo-stratified columnar. Now, it appears layered because the nuclei are at various heights. Right? Unlike the previous one where all the nuclei tended to be in the basal area, here the nuclei are kind of spread out all over the place in the individual cells. But they all touch or in contact with the basement membrane. Where do I find this? By the way, you notice that there's cilia up here, right? So these are ciliated. And some of the examples where we find it are the respiratory tract, nasal cavity. Let's look at one of my favorite types of cells since we're here. These right here, you see they look different inside. These are what we call goblet cells. And what we have inside here is mucus. And it makes sense because where these cells are located, like the respiratory tract, I release some mucus that helps to trap particles, and the cilia moves the mucus along. So these are goblet cells, these specialized mucus producing ones. Why? Because someone thought they looked like a wine goblet. And remember, in the world of histology, they called it like they saw it. All right, so we're going to end that there. I just want to walk through the main types of epithelial, single layer epithelial tissue.